The world's most important energy breakthrough just left a port in China inside a normal-looking shipping container, and it is a headline most people ignored. No explosions, no pipelines, no oil tankers, just hydrogen locked inside metal. For decades, countries like Japan bet everything on hydrogen, but failed to scale it, because there was one fatal problem. You couldn't move it. Or they could move it, but not easily, safely, not far away. Too dangerous, too expensive, too inefficient. But now China may have just solved that, with a system that stores hydrogen safely at room temperature and ships it across the ocean like regular cargo. And here's where it gets wild. If this works at scale, China could bypass global energy chokepoints such as the Strait of Hormuz, because it may no longer need oil and gas as energy sources, and it may even move one step closer to true energy independence, even in a global crisis when the Strait of Malacca were completely closed. So, is this the next rare earth moment, or the beginning of a whole new energy order? And let's take this story further and really unpack what's going on, because it isn't just about a new piece of technology or a single export shipment. What we're looking at is the early stage of a possible transformation in how energy is produced, stored, transported, and controlled globally. And when we place that into a high-risk scenario like a crisis at the Strait of Hormuz, the implications become even more serious. So think of this as a deeper dive, not just what happened, but why it matters, how it works, and what it could mean for the future of global energy and geopolitics, especially for China. Let's first zoom out. For over a century, the global energy system has been built around a simple idea: extract fuel from the ground, move it across long distances, and burn it wherever needed. Oil, natural gas, and coal all follow this logic. The problem is, this system depends heavily on geography. Pipelines, sea lanes, and choke points determine who has energy and who doesn't. Many in Washington have been dreaming all day long of blocking all key sea lanes in extreme cases, so that China won't get any fossil energy from the Middle East and South America, not even a drop of oil from Iran or Venezuela. One of the most critical of these choke points is the Strait of Hormuz. Another equally important is the Strait of Malacca. A huge percentage of the world's oil supply passes through the narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the world. If anything disrupts it, whether it's conflict, sanctions, or even accidents, the shock spreads instantly across the global economy. Just like what is happening today. Prices spike, supply chains freeze, and countries that depend on imports suddenly face shortages. China is one of those countries. Despite being the world's largest energy consumer, it still relies heavily on imported oil and gas, much of which travels through vulnerable routes like the Strait of Hormuz and the South China Sea. That dependency has always been a strategic concern. So for years, China has been asking a fundamental question: how to build an energy system that can survive even if global supply lines are disrupted. That's where hydrogen comes in. Hydrogen is often described as the ultimate clean energy. When we use it, the only byproduct is water. It can be used in fuel cells to generate electricity, burned for heat in industrial processes, or even used to power vehicles. On paper, it solves many problems at once, without creating new problems. It reduces emissions, diversifies energy sources, and can be produced from water using electricity. And electricity can come from the sun, the water, and the nuclear power. As the world's largest electricity generator, China needs a way to store excess electricity. Hydrogen creates a perfect loop, almost like a perpetual machine. Extract hydrogen from water with excess electricity from the wind, sun, tide, nuclear, and so on, and move it to other places, and then burn it, turning it into water again. But as we talked about earlier, hydrogen has one major weakness. It's incredibly difficult to store and transport. That is not a minor technical issue. It's the reason hydrogen hasn't become mainstream despite decades of research and investment. Countries like Japan invested heavily in hydrogen, betting that it would become the backbone of a future energy system. They developed fuel cell vehicles, built hydrogen refueling stations, and even designed ships to transport liquid hydrogen across oceans. But they ran into the same wall everyone else did. Hydrogen is too light, too volatile, and too expensive to move using traditional methods. Compressing it requires extreme pressure. Liquefying it requires extremely low temperatures. Both methods are costly, energy-intensive, and risky. And even when one manages to transport it, some of it is lost along the way due to leakage or evaporation. So the hydrogen economy has been stuck in limbo. The potential is there, but the logistics don't work. What China has done with solid-state hydrogen storage is essentially to bypass that problem. Instead of treating hydrogen as a gas or a liquid, They treat it as something that can be absorbed into a solid material. In this case, magnesium-based compounds. When hydrogen reacts with magnesium, it forms a stable solid called a metal hydride. That allows hydrogen to be stored at normal temperature and pressure without the need for extreme conditions. It might sound like a small technical tweak, but it changes everything. First, it dramatically improves safety. High-pressure hydrogen tanks are inherently risky, especially during transportation. A collision, a leak, or a structural failure can lead to catastrophic consequences. Liquid hydrogen, on the other hand, requires constant cooling and insulation. Any failure in the system can result in rapid evaporation or even explosions. Solid-state storage removes most of these risks. The hydrogen is locked inside a solid structure. It doesn't leak easily. It doesn't require high pressure. It doesn't need ultra-low temperatures. That makes it much easier to handle, transport, and store. Second, it improves efficiency. Because the hydrogen is stored in a dense form, you can transport larger quantities in a single container. And since there's no evaporation loss during transit, what you load is what you deliver. It's a big deal for long-distance shipping. Third, it reduces infrastructure requirements. Traditional hydrogen systems require specialized pipelines, storage tanks, and refueling stations. These are expensive to build and maintain. Solid-state systems, by contrast, can be integrated into existing logistics networks. We can move them like regular cargo containers, using ships, trains, or trucks. That is exactly what happened with the shipment to Malaysia from Shanghai, a Chinese port. A fully loaded solid-state hydrogen storage unit was transported by sea, a first at this scale. There were no established international standards for this kind of transport. China had to work with regulatory bodies to develop safety protocols and evaluation methods from scratch. That alone is significant. When we are the first to do something, we don't just prove that it's possible. We also set the rules for how it will be done in the future. We become the standard maker. And that's where things start to connect to the bigger picture. Because energy is not just about technology. It's about systems, standards, and control. If China can scale this technology, it could reshape the entire hydrogen supply chain. From production to storage to transportation to end use, each step could be optimized using solid-state systems. And if other countries adopt these systems, they will likely adopt the associated standards as well. That is similar to what happened with rare earth elements. China didn't just produce them, it built the entire processing and manufacturing ecosystem around them. That gave it a dominant position in the global supply chain. Hydrogen could follow a similar path, but with even greater impact. Now let's return to the idea of energy independence under extreme conditions. Imagine a scenario where global oil supplies are disrupted. The Strait of Hormuz is blocked, and tankers can't pass through without Iran's approval. Oil prices surge, and countries scramble to secure alternative supplies. In a traditional system, China would be under pressure. It would need to draw on strategic reserves, secure alternative routes, and manage domestic consumption carefully, even if Iran allows Chinese vessels to pass the Strait of Hormuz. But how about the Strait of Malacca? How about the vast ocean separating China from the oil-rich countries? Oil tankers might become easy targets in wartime. Enemies could cut the energy supply, and China would be done. But in a hydrogen-based system, the dynamics are different. China can produce hydrogen domestically using a variety of energy sources, including coal, natural gas, nuclear power, and increasingly renewable energy, such as wind and solar. Once produced, that hydrogen can be stored in solid form and distributed across the country. That creates a kind of energy buffer, even if it cannot solve all problems. Instead of relying on continuous imports, China can build up hydrogen reserves in advance. These reserves can be stored safely and transported when needed, without the constraints of pipelines or shipping lanes. In other words, hydrogen becomes not just an energy source, but an energy storage medium. That is especially important for renewable energy. Wind and solar are intermittent. They produce energy when the wind blows or the sun shines, not necessarily when demand is highest. Hydrogen allows that energy to be captured and stored for later use. So now we have a system where energy can be generated domestically, stored efficiently, and distributed flexibly. That's a very different model from the current one, which depends heavily on imports and real-time supply chains. And that is where the concept of resilience comes in. In an uncertain world, resilience is just as important as efficiency. A system that is slightly less efficient but more resilient can be far more valuable in the long run. Solid-state hydrogen storage offers exactly that kind of trade-off. It may not be the cheapest option today, but it provides stability, safety, and independence. Now let's talk about the global implications. If China can successfully export this technology, it could create a new kind of energy network. Instead of exporting oil or gas, it exports hydrogen storage systems and the associated technology. Countries that adopt these systems can build their own hydrogen economies without massive upfront investment in infrastructure. That is particularly attractive for developing countries. Building a traditional hydrogen infrastructure from scratch is expensive and complex. But if they can import hydrogen in solid form and use it locally, the barrier to entry becomes much lower. That is why the shipment to Malaysia matters. It's not just about the volume of hydrogen. It's about demonstrating a new model of energy trade. And once that model is proven, it can scale up quickly. Two Americas, Europe, Asia, and Africa all have growing energy needs. Many of these regions also have abundant renewable energy resources. With the right technology, they could produce their own hydrogen or import it as needed. China could position itself at the center of this system and play a key role in shaping its development. Now, what about the competition? Countries like Japan are not out of the game. They still have strong technological capabilities and experience in hydrogen systems. But they face a challenge. Their existing investments are heavily tied to liquid hydrogen and high-pressure systems. Switching to a new approach is not easy. It requires not just new technology, but also a shift in strategy and infrastructure. That is a classic example of path dependence. Once committed to a certain direction, it becomes harder to change course, even if a better option emerges. China, on the other hand, has been more flexible. It has pursued multiple approaches to hydrogen, including both liquid and solid-state systems, which gives it more options and allows it to adapt more quickly to new developments. Finally, let's talk about the long-term outlook. Hydrogen is not going to replace fossil fuels overnight. There are still many challenges to overcome, including cost, efficiency, and scalability. But the direction is clear. As the world moves toward cleaner energy, hydrogen will play an increasingly important role. The question is not whether hydrogen will be part of the future. The question is who will control its development. With solid-state storage, China has taken an important step. It has addressed one of the biggest barriers to hydrogen adoption and opened new possibilities for its use and transportation. More importantly, it has linked this technological breakthrough to a broader strategic vision: energy independence, resilience, and global influence. So when that container left Shanghai on March 11th, 2026, it wasn't just carrying hydrogen. It carried a new idea for how energy systems can be built in a world where uncertainty is the only constant. And if that idea proves successful, it could reshape not just the energy industry, but the balance of power in the global system.